you said, going to be discussing free and open source software, giving you an introduction to what's out there and how it could be useful to you, because about 5 years ago, I didn't know any of this existed, and it was just a complete unknown for me. So at least coming out of this, you'll know that there is a whole world of free software that you might not be using. So first of all, it's not completely obvious what it is. There's a lot of free software out there that's not open source, and that's not really what I'm going to talk about today. We're talking, it can be modified and improved by anyone, so if you think if you're a developer, you have an improvement, you can work on that software with people in your organization, so each group can modify it to fit their needs. And it's just about a lot of people making small improvements. It's not about 10 people doing the whole project and then it being over. It's about lots of small changes being made over time by smart people. And as a result, you have all these people working on it every day. You have the most up-to-date software. But whenever it's something that needs to be up to date, that's where the free and open source is really important. And just a little bit about the background. So a lot of software started out as being free in the earliest days of computing. Then it began to not be free. But this guy in the early 80s, Richard Stallman, said, well, I think it should be free. And his argument was not a communal argument. It wasn't people should give their work to people who are less competent to use it. It was more of an economic argument. This is the best way, he thought it was the best way to develop software, was this open source method. And well, the main reasons is he saw that proprietary software limits compatibility, it prevents development, you don't have the most up-to-date product, you have to rely on submitting your feedback to a company, then they make the changes if they want to, and if you're the only one who wanted that change, they don't make it. And at best, you're talking 4 years down the road, the change has been made. And then another thing is definitely the money issue. I've talked to some companies that have side licenses for programs, and none of the employees use them because it's just a legacy where they used to need this program, they haven't cut it out, and you would just think that that's money being wasted, we could do something better with it. So the base of the free software and open source software is the operating system. It's definitely not the only aspect, but I wanted to talk about this first. And if you haven't heard of Linux, it was developed by this guy and a team of developers, but he took the Unix operating system and made it friendly to the end user. And the point is, people think, you hear Linux or Unix and you think, well, I have to type all this stuff into a command line. And that's not the point at all. It's an advanced graphical operating system that looks a lot like the Mac OS. And where Mac OS has the little icons that pop up down here, this version of Linux has them pop up on the side. And there are a lot of different, they call them flavors. So you can find a version of Linux that's exactly what you want, and you're not just pegged into waiting for somebody to make the next new release. And just some reasons why I think, and others think, that Linux is a better choice for even non-expert users than Windows and Mac. And it runs faster. And if you don't believe that, if you have an old computer that's really slow, just wipe it off and install a really lightweight Linux distribution. It will run so much faster than any of the Windows versions do. And another issue is viruses. I don't have any virus protection on my computer, and it's not just that not as many people use Linux, so they're not targeted. It's actually the software behind Linux is less vulnerable to bugs, and so many people look at it, they catch the bugs earlier. Security flaws are caught, and it's what's used on servers, so they have to have maximum security. And my favorite part is the free programs. There's an unbelievable amount of free programs, all downloadable from the same place. And I'll go over a few of those later. And again, depending on what you want in an operating system, whether you want it highly graphical or really lightweight, there's a Linux version for that. And who's using it? This gives you an idea of the high-level users. Definitely the world's fastest computers, the Palmetto cluster here, of course, uses it, and most servers in the world use it. And I think the 8 to 12% of desktops worldwide is surprising, but the main thing that we think of is only 2% of US desktops. And that surprises me, but maybe it shouldn't, because some of the biggest operating systems companies are in the United States, of course. But this whole free and open source thing isn't just about the operating system. And those companies make a lot of income through other products. So we don't have to talk about shutting those companies down when Linux has a bigger market share. And then I want to talk about kind of how this happens. How can you go from proprietary software to free? Because it does happen, and this is my favorite example. So there's a program that's existed for a long time, helps you out with statistics. It was called S+. And then now what people are using is a program called R, and it's the same thing as S+. And this is what it looks like. It's a basic command line program with some different windows, but it's really popular in statistics. And this is how it happened. It started out as S+, but then people realized, well, S+, it's a pretty simple program, it's just a language. The people who made it programmed a lot of functionality, but if you get a large enough group together, they could just recreate the program, and that's exactly what they did. But it went a lot farther than that. It turned into millions of active developers. It's the most up-to-date statistics software on the market right now. It changes when a journal article comes out, either the author of it or people get together and they write an R package so you can implement that functionality. That's how this happens. It starts out as just a simple program, and then people come in and say, well, we can make this to our own needs, and then they do. And the moral of the story is S+ was trying to do it with a few programmers, but thousands or millions of people working on their own for no money have done a much better job of developing this program than those few paid developers could do. And really, in the end, you can't copyright a programming language. People have tried, because legally you can, but it just doesn't work. And this is not the business model for all software. There will always be niche markets that get filled with proprietary software. But in something that gets as many users as a program like this, free and open source makes sense. And now I'll talk about a few other programs that have come out of existing programs. And of course, that's the first clone sheep. So if y'all have ever used MATLAB, I know a lot of the engineers do. There's an exact version of MATLAB out there, and it hasn't pushed as far ahead as a program like R has. But I think in the future it could push well past MATLAB and be the same kind of story as R and S+. And then not just in those command line programs, but even in programs like Adobe Photoshop and the heavy intensive graphics programs, the Linux users have gotten together and developed really impressive graphical programs and video editing. Otherwise, all of those people who do graphics wouldn't be using Linux. And here's an example. This is my favorite geometric shape, the Mandelbrot set. And I took some code that was meant for MATLAB and just copied and pasted it into Octave. And it does use some fancy functions in there, so it works. I mean, just plug it in, and it's the same as MATLAB. So if you don't want to buy the MATLAB license, you can use Octave. And same thing with Word and OpenOffice. OpenOffice is not an exact clone, but it certainly has all the functionality, and you can open open and save files that are in Word, and no one has to know that you're using OpenOffice. And then it's all available from the Software Center. And it's just an unbelievable collection of programs, 275 for science and engineering alone. And then something that I wanted to mention, this is pretty technical, this is just an open source development. It's been around for a long time, since Donald Knuth in the maybe early 70s, called LaTeX. And if y'all are, I would highly recommend it for thesis and dissertation work. And people really freak out when they see it and think about it, but it doesn't have to be that hard. There's another open source program called Lix that helps you get the job done. And so most of it is just typing in, and it does the LaTeX work for you. So how do you get started in this? Because I'm not saying that you have to make an overnight transition to this, because there's not necessarily a learning curve, but you're used to this software, it's compatible with everything. And so instead of jumping ship overnight, what you can do, you can start using some of those programs on your current computer. So even though your operating system is not open source, all of these programs still work on open source. And that's one step. This is the step that I did first. You can just insert a drive, a bootable disk, and it will ask you if you want to run it and just test it out. And so if you run it, it won't overwrite anything, and you can try it out and then turn off your computer, unhook the disk, and things will be back to normal. Another way, after I tried it for the first time, I did a dual boot configuration, and this is what I recommend for everybody, because you don't have to erase anything. You can just you can boot up 2 different operating systems and choose between them when you start up. And that way you don't have to get rid of any of your old programs, and then you can have your new operating system when you want to use that. And that's really all, but a few websites, and these will be up on the Vox Novo site if you want to check these out, but just an explanation of free software and the purpose of it, and I hope y'all get started. So thanks for having me.